Thanks so much to all my patrons. Join now to help support the channel and help pick the books I review on this channel. Link in the description. And I am done. Okay, so I just got done listening to Blood of Liscor. This is book 8, I think, of The Wandering Inn by pirateaba, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing this book, which was literally just right now. So, yeah, loved it. Super predictable, 5 out of 5 for me, and I've now given 5 out of 5s to 7 of the 8 books. One of them I think I gave 4 or 4.5, maybe 4. But yeah, the series is one of my all-time favorites. It will go down that way. I suspect my thoughts of the series are only going to improve because the series is improving before my eyes, and I have just scratched the surface. That's right. I have 8 books in. These books are anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 pages. They're enormous. This one I think was 1,700 pages, and they are indeed getting better. Not like every single one of them is better than the last, but you know, it's kind of like the stock market. You know, it has ups and downs. You know, but you know, it goes up over time, and that's what the series is doing as well. The author is just getting better and better. I don't know much about this author because nobody does, because the author's anonymous. But I did the only interview that I know of with this author. No, there's been a couple written interviews, but I did a very unique interview, which I will link up above right here. You should check it out with the author. But I did this interview where I asked questions, and then the audiobook narrator came in and responded. So it has this fun back and forth in video format. But I believe this is the first stuff that pirateaba has written. And so it makes sense that this author is improving over time. And it's really, really, really impressive. So I have a lot of things I want to say. Let us start with one of the obvious ones, at least the one that jumped to me, because I don't go off any notes here. I'm going purely off the dome. And it's the fact that I have these bad boys while I did this. I have read the previous 7 installments of this via ebook, which, you know, you can read all of these for free online if you'd like, or you can get them for $3.99 per ebook on the Kindle store, which is super cheap for enormous books, or you can just pay the Audible price for the audiobook formats. I'm very cheap, so I have done the ebook formats for all of the ones going up to this point. But I forgot who from pirateaba's team. I've been in contact with their team a lot in the past year or so, as we've done some promotional stuff where I've, you know, done some book cover reveals, and we did that interview, and so I've talked to their team, and they were very kind enough to send me the audiobook for this one. So I thought I'd give it a shot, but I was very nervous. I have heard unanimously glowing reviews for the audiobook narration. Not just the content, but the narration itself. The audiobook narrator is 𝐿, and that's who did the interview that I did, that I linked above earlier. So I know that she has got a great voice, but I don't know how it translates into the voices for the characters, because The Wandering Inn has a lot of characters, and it's going to be very difficult for a single audiobook narrator to nail a bunch of different voices. That's why you often see in these huge sprawling epics that you'll get 2 narrators, oftentimes a woman and a man, so they can do the corresponding voices. And but this one is just one person, so that was very nerve-wracking. That's one thing I was worried about. And the second is that, you know, I listen to audiobooks less quickly than I listen to physical books, and that's because I have more time to read regular books. So, you know, I probably, you know, for every one audiobook I read, I probably do 2 physical books. So looking at something like The Wandering Inn that's like 1,700 pages, and I know I'm going to read it a little bit slower, you know, I'd have to know that like the better part of a whole month is going to be dedicated to one book on audiobook, and that just seems like a big commitment. I'd like to vary things up, and I don't really want to have to sit with a single book for weeks on end. I like to kind of power through my books. It's how I enjoy to get the content. But nonetheless, I decided to jump in, and oh my God. You know, everyone was right, and I want to go a step further, is that I am instantly putting 𝐿 up into my top of the top of the top of audiobook narrators. I have long since felt like there are 3 audiobook narrators that are clearly above everybody else. One of them is Stephen Pacey, who's most notable for narrating The First Law. Another is Michael Page, who's most notable for narrating The Gentleman Bastards, or the Lives of Locke Lamora, for those that are not familiar with the series name. And the other is the most recent one that I've discovered, is Jeff Hayes, who is the audiobook narrator for Dungeon Crawler Carl. But I can very confidently say that Andrea Parsinoe fits in very nicely in this, four horsemen of, greatness when it comes to audiobook narration for fantasy books. She is so good. She might be the best of the bunch. And, Stephen Pacey, I felt like is the best, in large part because of the enormous variation that he puts in his voices. And the fact that you really feel like he's studying this before he does it, that he's not reading it. He's putting on a performance. And it's so much so that, he plays with different characters' voices. One of the characters, 𝐒𝐲𝐽, has a different internal monologue from an external monologue. In his internal monologue, he has a very heavy lisp, even more than I do, but in his external dialogue. But when he thinks about himself, he doesn't give himself that lisp. And that's a really cool little thing. And it's not just that. It's tons of little... That I think is a really good explanation for why he's so great and overall. But Andrea Parsinoe is gotta be just as good, if not better. I mean, her range is mind-blowing. I truly don't understand it. I need to do a little bit of research into how she's able to pull this off, because I can very easily say that she is the best narrator I've ever heard that can do the opposite gender's voices. Bad audiobook narrators, or even decent audiobook narrators, will usually have pretty poor representations of the opposite gender's voice. And even good ones, even if they can pull off a good, a male audiobook narrator doing a female voice, if they can pull off a decent one, usually it's just that same voice they use for everybody, or slight variations of it. Andrea Parsinoe's male voices sound extremely masculine, far more masculine than mine. They sound genuine. They sound extremely far-ranging. She's got a ton of them. I feel like I'm not even hearing them all. It just, the amount that she has. And not only that, but she's busting out fantasy creature voices. I mean, this series is known for having humans, but humans are one part of this world where they have, drakes and gnolls and tons of other types of people that all have their own unique voices. And not only that, but, there's these Antinium, which are like these huge, strong ants. Not only does she have a very unique, wonderful voice for something like the Antinium, but you can literally differentiate the different Antinium based on the accents that she's using within the Antinium's voices themselves. That is crazy impressive. Now, I do think that she does a little bit too heavily leaning into Earth accents for certain people. She'll do like an Irish accent. She'll do, kind of like a German accent, or these different things that we know. But it's not like she just relies on that only. It's just like she'll assign somebody a certain voice, so it's very unique. It just works so dang well. I mean, one of the characters in this story, Halrock, I think is how you say his name, 𝐭𝐲𝐿 is the one I'm thinking of, is like this crazy gruff minotaur who's got this deepest voice you can conjure, and she just basically effortlessly does this thing. So is she doing this in post-production? Is this how she sounds as it's coming out? I don't know. I need to figure it out, but it is mind-blowing. So do yourself a favor. Don't read this book. Listen to this book. Listen to this series. It's perfect. And I can confidently say that I'm probably never going to read one again. I'm going to listen to all of these going forward. And it also makes a lot of sense to me. When I did my my interview with pirateaba, Pirate mentioned to me that they make more money out of audio sales than all the other sources of revenue, whether it be by ads on the website, the Patreon, which is one of the more it's one of the most successful Patreon accounts on the Patreon platform for writers. It's impressive. It's extremely impressive. But the audiobook does more than anything. And I think a lot of that has to do with the audiobook narrator. So kudos to both Andrea Parsinoe and pirateaba for linking up and making the perfect duo for a book and a series like this. It's perfection. So beyond that, I got to stop my gushing on the audiobook narration here and talk about this book a little bit, because there's a lot to say about this book. So this series itself starts off very unassuming. And I think it throws a lot of people off because the series that I read at the beginning is no longer that series anymore. The series I read at the beginning was a slice of life, portal fantasy. I think it's called portal fantasy or 𝐒𝐮𝐲 or something like that. I don't know. I'm not well versed in this kind of stuff. But it's this story about a young woman who is on Earth, and all of a sudden, I don't remember what was happening. Like she goes into the pantry and all of a sudden finds herself is stuck in another world. And she decides to become an innkeeper, and it's filled with all these classes, and it's like Dungeons and Dragons. Everybody has a class. You can power up. The higher class you get, the more the moves the special powers you get. It's really fun and video gamey, and it works really well for this. But it started off so lighthearted. It was truly slice of life stuff, like Legends and Lattes kind of, but in a grander scale. But it is slowly morphed into the definitive epic fantasy story. I mean, it is epic in every sense of the word. I mean, we've got global conflict, not conflict on a micro scale, but global. And all of these different continents are independent from each other. You feel like while their understanding of the greater geopolitical thing going on, they're dealing with their own stuff, and it feels so lifelike. It oftentimes you can read a fantasy book and it feels like you're stuck in a book because everybody's feeding into the story. Everywhere you go, it doesn't feel like a real world. I often felt like this in something like The Faithful and the Fallen, a series that I love. It's one of my all-time favorites. But when a character would go to a new town, that town didn't feel bustling full of life. It felt like a video game where everything was centered around the main character. And in this story, it's not like that. This one, it feels distinct. It feels more like 𝐒𝐿𝐴ZN that had that feel to it, where it felt like everywhere you went had its own culture and had all these millions of stories to tell, even though they have not been written. But it feels like that. It feels like if you just stepped off the map into another town, there'd be so many things going on. And I love that about this series. But it has turned hugely epic in scope. It has turned dark at times. There's still a lighthearted feel to the whole series, but there's darkness, there's depression, there's death, there is crazy, huge, the most epic of the epic battles that you can possibly conceive of exist in this. Huge, sprawling storylines that are connecting and disconnecting, and it's an incredible work of art that we're dealing with here. And it also does this really wonderful thing, something that I love. Another thing that I think, I don't know if it borrows from 𝐒𝐿𝐴ZN because they're so different, but it has the same feel to it, where in 𝐒𝐿𝐴ZN was comfortable not telling every story. 𝐒𝐿𝐴ZN said, we've got too much to tell to spend too much time on one thing. So I often have described it as this branching thing, where the main 𝐒𝐿𝐴ZN story would be going like this, and then it would come off and do this little offshoot story, but then it would stop and you'd keep going, and these offshoots would happen. And sometimes one of the offshoots would turn into the main story, and the original branch would die off. That's great. That is great storytelling right there. You don't need to have, this closure on every single little thing. And for a series as sprawling as The Wandering Inn that's got so many POV characters, I mean, characters will just pop up and the author will talk about them for 200 pages, and tell this little mini book about this little thing and then never come back to them again, just for world building alone. Now, maybe they tie on later. I suspect that a lot of them don't. And it's just to make you live and breathe in this world. That is bravery from an author. I'm here for it. I love it. But in this story, something different happened. It's the first time that this ever happened, because at least the first time since the first book, where in the first book, it was the story of Aaron Solstice, this innkeeper, and everything centered around Aaron. Ever since then, we've had a couple hundred pages in this continent, and then a little over here, and then we'll come back over here, and then, Erin's the main story, but sometimes we won't hear from her for 500 pages, and then we'll get the end of the book being centered around her. It's a lot of jumping around this world. But in this one, there was the normal thing at the beginning of the story. We did a little jumping around from a couple of the major side stories we had a conflict, and I loved everything about it, because I love independently both of the aspects of this conflict. I don't want to ruin for anybody that hasn't read this about what that conflict is, but it is between I'll say the group that Rags is a part of, and the group that Lakin is a part of. And they had a bit of a misunderstanding. And I'm sitting there reading this going, no. I love both of you. Everyone stop being stupid. It was very compelling. I love the story that went along here and the idea that we got to jump back and forth between these two different groups, which is not normally something we get to do. Normally, when something goes into action, we stick with that one group. But to do the bouncing back and forth thing from two groups that the reader already knows and loves is really fun. But that felt like the same thing. And then we jumped back out of that into the Aaron story, and it's like, okay, we're going to be bouncing around here. But then it stops. This is like, I don't know, 200 pages into the 1,700-page story, maybe 300 pages. I don't know. I did audiobook. But after that point, I think we went to Erin, and then we just stayed with her. And all of the things that were involved in Erin's story. There are other things here, but they're all the same story, right? And that was interesting and very different. I don't know that I would love it going forward constantly, but, it felt like the story that was being told was a grand, epic adventure involving this dungeon that exists below the city here, or not necessarily below, but adjacent to the city that most of the stuff's taking part of. This dungeon has been the center of a lot of my favorite moments in the series. Every time we get one of these dungeon crawling storylines, it's exciting. There's loot to be had. There's new monsters. It's, opening up the wrong door. Now monsters are flooding out, coming into the city, and we're having this huge battle. And every time the dungeons involve, something cool happens. But we got a very, very, very long extended book about the dungeons. And that's great. I mean, it felt like we needed some sort of long time here because we've been in these bits and pieces of it, but there's so much more there. And there's a couple hidden storylines there. One of them involving, I don't want to ruin anything for anybody that's read this before, but there's a couple characters sitting down in the dungeon that we already know about. We've been getting a little bit about one of them, but we've got nothing from the other one, even though the readers kind of felt like that person existed down there. But this is a book about that character, right? And about what that character's been up to since we last saw them. And I loved it. It was a wonderful story. I wasn't sure exactly where it was going to go. I loved the direction it went. And it actually got so intense towards the end of the story when all of the characters that we know about in this world came together as one to confront this problem going on in the dungeon. I actually got teary-eyed, not from sadness, but from the epic awesomeness of it. Sanderson does this a lot to me in his stories, mostly in Stormlight, where characters will do the right thing, or have this major moment of clarity, or everything comes together to work. The plan finally comes together, and redemption is going to be had, and some badass words will be said, and then we're going to go into fight, and I'm sitting here teary-eyed, just waiting for the good guys to win, and I got that moment here, and I did not know that pirateaba was capable of bringing my emotions out like that, and it worked. It felt a little corny, but it was perfect. And the perfect level of corniness. I know corny doesn't sound like a good thing. It can work really well, and it worked perfectly here. So, wonderful story. This book is going to go down as, one of my favorites. I don't know if I liked it quite as much as the previous one to this one, but, it's incredible. It's great. It's amazing. All of these Wandering In books are turning into some of my favorite books. And so, yeah, can't wait to keep going. Can't wait to keep listening. Just incredible. So if you have not started this series yet, just start it already. What are you doing? It's so good. And you don't have to get everybody that tells me they want to read Wandering In, but don't. It all is the same reason. And it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming because you hear something like it's multiple times the length of The Wheel of Time. The Wheel of Time is already daunting and overwhelming and turns a lot of people off because of how long it is. So to hear that there's this series that's much longer than The Wheel of Time and is being written at a pace that puts Sanderson to shame is too much for many people. But I want everyone to know that you don't have to catch up. You can enjoy these stories for what they are. And every chapter feels like its own little story because of the nature of it being a web serial. And you could read a book or two or three or four or five and stop and feel like you have closure. And you feel like what you got was of value and that you didn't miss out because you didn't get an ending. I don't know if there is an ending to this story. Pirate says there is. We'll see, right? But there certainly doesn't need to be. And if the stories all of a sudden stop tomorrow, while there would be a lot of disappointed people, you wouldn't get that George R. R. Martin thing where people just feel like deprived of an ending. You'd get a lot of people saying, thanks for the adventure. And while I do think more people should say that about George R. R. Martin, thanks for the adventure, and we don't need an ending because we're never going to get one. That's not the consensus, but I do think that would be the consensus for something like Wandering. So read a book. They're long, but read a book or read part of a book. See if you like it. And if you like it, keep going. And if you don't like it, stop. And know that you're probably going to like it. Because I feel like most of the people that I've recommended this to that read it, most of the people I say it to, don't just like it. They instantly overtake me. And they're like, Matt, I can't stop reading it. I'm hooked. I'm addicted. And I'm now caught up. And that's cool. That's some of the best emotions that I've got out of this YouTubing adventure that I've been on, is being able to turn people onto awesome series that they never would have got turned on to. And this is probably the hallmark of that is The Wandering End. So maybe my longest book review ever. I'm going to stop there. I was planning on doing like a spoiler part of this, but I think I gave enough hints to let people know what's going on here. I did get some complaints before, people that are Wandering End vets, that they wanted me to either do spoilers or really make it clear what I'm talking about, because it all jumbles together over time. So hopefully I've done that. Let me know if you're a Wandering End fan, if I nailed, balancing those things. But thank you so much for watching this. And as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Amy, Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, JD, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝗟𝗏𝑔𝐴, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Slay, Sydney Baker, Tahir, Zion, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Harry W, Joe UK, Kat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Sky, and Tyler. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.